Tony Abbott, good morning, welcome.
G'day, Barry.
So the business community wants certainty. You're certainly clear on one point. There will be no carbon tax under a government you lead. But what about an emissions trading scheme? Will there be an emissions trading scheme at any point?
Well, the world is running away from an emissions trading scheme at 1,000,000 miles an hour. It's been obvious, Barry, since Copenhagen that we're not moving towards these things, we're moving away from them.
Are you sure about that, though, that they're moving away from a carbon tax, perhaps, but you're banking a lot on the fact that there will never be an emissions trading scheme?
Well, as I said, all the signs, whether it's America, whether it's Canada, whether it's the rest of the big economies, there are no signs that any of them are embracing a carbon tax or an economy-wide emissions trading scheme.
So you don't think there'll ever be one in Australia, that Australia will ever be part of a global market?
Well, who knows what might happen in a decade or 2 decades or 3 decades, but our challenge is to deal with the problems of today. And at the moment, this is the world's biggest carbon tax at the worst possible time. We are exposing ourselves to all sorts of economic damage without doing any environmental good.
So you're satisfied that's the view of the business community as well, that they don't want an ETS in place at any point?
You can always find some voices that will say, yes, we want one, but I don't think anyone wants a carbon tax of $23 a tonne, because it's the world's biggest carbon tax at a very bad time. Now, I've visited literally hundreds of businesses over the last year. I don't think Julia Gillard has visited very many at all. And the universal message I'm getting, Barry, is they don't want this thing because it's going to act like a reverse tariff.
But the ETS is a different question.
Well, I don't believe that it is a different question because it will act as a reverse tariff. If it's a unilateral carbon tax or a unilateral emissions trading scheme, it puts up our prices vis-à-vis our competitors. It hurts jobs in this country and effectively protects jobs in other countries.
Okay, you've got a problem repealing it, of course, but then the other issue is compensation. Your approach seems too good to be true. There will be no carbon tax, so therefore there will be no price rises, and yet people will get tax cuts anyway, and presumably the pension increases will stay.
We will pay for tax cuts without a carbon tax and for pension increases without a carbon tax through sensible savings in unnecessary and wasteful government
But why
expenditure.
is there a need for those tax cuts or for the pension increases if there is no carbon tax?
Well, because we want people to be better off and we want government to live within its means. Now, at the last election, Barry, we came up with $50 billion worth of savings. The challenge will be harder this time. I accept that because these are tougher fiscal times, but I believe that we can find significant savings that will enable us to give a tax cut without a carbon tax.
So you want people to be better off, but you want government to live within its means. The two contradict one another.
I don't believe that's true at all. Look at what's happened across the Tasman. In about 5 years, John Key has got government as a percentage of GDP down from 35 to 30% of GDP. That's a 5% reduction in government spending. Now, has New Zealand been devastated? No, it hasn't. These are the sorts of reductions that you can achieve over time if you believe in small government rather than big government, and that's Labor's problem. This is essentially an old-fashioned borrow and spend, tax and spend Labor government that has forgotten the lessons that Bob Hawke and Paul Keating learned.
You would make it a lot easier on yourself if you supported the mining tax, though, and at least with that tax you've got significant community support.
The trouble with the mining tax, Barry, is that it's a success tax. It sends exactly the wrong lesson to our citizens and to the world. It says we're a country where if you succeed, the government hits you.
There was an editorial in The Australian that said that you might expect that Mr Abbott would gratefully accept these dollars on the behalf of the community. Instead, even with the budget deficit or a budget deep in deficit, Mr Abbott says no.
Because you've got to pursue the right policies for the long-term benefit of the country, not the wrong ones. And I want our country to be a country where success is celebrated, not penalised.
In retrospect, do you think, though, you misjudged when you so vigorously opposed the Queensland flood levy?
Look, that was only ever a temporary levy, but it did express the fundamental conviction, Barry, of the coalition that the ordinary business of government should be met out of the ordinary revenues of government. Sure, the Queensland floods were a big disaster, but they weren't so big that we needed a new tax to pay for them.
But people copped it. Don't you think they showed a generosity of spirit in the way that they dealt with that levy? They paid it and they moved on.
People don't show generosity by paying a tax. People show generosity by giving freely. Now, people did give freely of their own income to the various appeals. That was generous. The government hitting you up with a tax, that's not generosity.
But looking back on that, don't you think that people copped it?
In the end, people accept what government does, often not very willingly, but we are a democracy, Barrie, and people understand that if you don't like the government, you get rid of them at the next election.
Do you think that overall you do enough to promote the country and particularly the strength of the economy?
Well, the point I keep making at the moment, Barrie, is that we're a great country let down by bad government. Now, I'm always building up Australia, and I think if we had a better government, we would be much better able to play to our strengths. And what I hope after the next election we'll have is a better government that believes in lower taxes, better services, stronger borders and modern infrastructure. And that's what I want to do, should I have the chance to govern the country after the election.
You do build up the country, but not so much the economy and the strength of the economy. You once said that the international investment community thinks Australia is no longer a safe place to do business. Do they really believe that? Do you think that is the view of the international investment community?
Well, if you listen to people like Jack Nasser and Marius Kloppers, who are Australia's biggest international business people, they're saying that we've got a tax problem, a workplace relations problem, and a false class war problem, which is being fostered by the government.
But they're not saying Australia is not a safe place to do business.
What they are saying is that at current mineral prices, at current dollar values and at current internal cost structures, you don't invest in Australia. That's what they're saying.
If that is the view of the international investment community, now, what is your view? Do you think Australia is a safe place to do business?
Well, I think if we get rid of the carbon tax, if we get rid of the mining tax, if we can bring the workplace relations pendulum back to the sensible centre, if we can cut red tape, and I want to cut $1 billion a year out of business red tape costs, if we can do all those things, yes, Australia will be a great place to do business. The danger at the moment, Barrie, is that the Australian moment in the Asian century might be missed because of complacency on the part of government.
But without those things, you seem to be suggesting it's not a safe place to invest, and there's a lot of evidence to the contrary.
Well, I think there are a lot of people who've made investments on the basis of no mining tax and no carbon tax who suddenly find big problems. Take the IMPEX development in the Timor Sea. Over the life of that project, they'll pay $1 billion worth of carbon tax, and that's $1 billion straight off their bottom line.
On asylum seekers, now, clearly turning back the boats will impact on our relationship with Indonesia. Why did you not discuss this issue with President Yudhoyono when you met him this week?
Well, I don't talk about what I discussed with President Yudhoyono, Barrie, and this is one of the problems that the government has got. They're more interested in making heroes of themselves in the media than building a good relationship with Indonesia.
No, but it's clear that you didn't discuss it with him. Now, why did you not discuss it? Is it because you were troubled about what he might say?
Again, I'm not going to say what I did and didn't discuss with the President, but the fact is, if we're talking about the issue of turning boats around, it's been done before, it can be done again.
But if that's your view, why not be up front with him? I mean, you've got an opportunity, you're sitting across from him. Why would you not raise it with him?
Well, as I said, you shouldn't assume what was and wasn't discussed.
My sources are pretty good. Well, you did not raise this issue with him.
Well, the fact is, Barrie, Indonesia knows exactly what our position is. They know exactly what our position is. They know that on day one of an incoming coalition government, the Navy will be given new orders to deal with illegal boat arrivals and with safety at sea. These are orders.
They don't like that policy.
And I accept that from time to time, Australia will do things that the Indonesians don't particularly like. The difference between a government I lead and the current government is I won't be playing this for media advantage, and I will try to have a no surprises policy with the Indonesians, where at least we tell them well in advance what we've got in mind.
A no surprises policy. You had an opportunity to talk to him about it and you didn't.
Well, it's not as if the Indonesians are in ignorance as to what the coalition intends.
How would it work? A boat turns up on the horizon, you locate the boat. What happens then?
It'll work the same way in the future that it's worked in the past. And let's never forget, Barry, that Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard are both on the record at different times supporting the policy of turning around boats.
But how does it work, though? You locate the boat, as I said, you take away fuel and food or something to make it difficult for them to carry on?
It's the same as it worked in the past.
Well, remind us of how that was.
Well, I'm not going to go into those sorts of details.
But
it was
critical. I mean, tell us how it works.
And various naval commanders have explained all this in great detail before Senate Estimates Committee and elsewhere. But it was done in the past, it can be done in the future.
But why can't you give us a sense of how it actually works?
Well, because you've just begun to give us a sense of that, Barry, and we've had this explained to us by the naval commanders, and I don't want to be setting myself up as a modern-day Captain Hornblower.
Yeah, and one of those was Admiral Chris Barrie, and he doesn't like it. He thinks it's dangerous, both for the Navy and for the asylum seekers.
And I'm not saying that this is particularly pleasant work. It is a very tough job.
Dangerous work.
Yes, it's dangerous work, but that's why people join our armed forces. They go into harm's way to help our country.
But you conceded it's dangerous, then why go through with it?
Because it's less dangerous all round than these boats taking to sea. You see, as long as the boats keep coming, the tragedies will keep happening. And the great thing about turning the boats around is that it sends the clearest possible signal to the people smugglers and their customers: the game is up. The game is up. And that's the best possible way to stop the boats.
And I still don't see, though, if you take away the fuel, for example, they just keep going until they run out of fuel, and then it's Australia's obligation to rescue them.
Well, as I said, Barry, it's been done in the past. The professionalism of the Navy was up to it in the past. I have no doubt that the Navy is just as professional now as it was in 2001.
And then they end up in Indonesia. Indonesia is not a signatory to the conventions. What's the difference between that and sending them to Malaysia?
Well, they put themselves in Indonesia.
But they still end up in a country. You're allowing them to end up in a country that's not a signatory to the convention.
That they put themselves in.
It's their fault.
Well, they put themselves in Indonesia. They didn't put themselves in Malaysia.
Will you nominate an MP to sit on the multi-party reference group?
You know, we have a policy, Barry. We don't need an external committee to tell us what our policy is. And rather than appoint new committees to tell her what her policy should be, the Prime Minister should be using the committee that's been set up for this purpose, the Cabinet. The Cabinet is the committee that should be deciding what the government's policy is, and what the government should be doing is adopting a policy that it can get through the Parliament.
So it's nothing to do with the terms of reference. You won't be putting anybody up?
Well, I think as a courtesy, the Prime Minister should be telling us exactly what this committee is supposed to achieve.
What's the point? You've just said you're not interested in sitting on it.
The committee which should be dealing with this is the Cabinet. You see, it's interesting, isn't it, Barry? On the carbon tax, Julia Gillard said she had to work with the Parliament she'd got. On mandatory pre-commitment, she said she had to work with the Parliament she'd got. On company tax cuts, she said she had to work with the Parliament she's got. Why won't she work with the Parliament she's got and take the offshore processing that this Parliament will approve, which is offshore processing at Nauru, PNG and 146 other countries that have signed the convention?
On the James Ashby-Peter Slipper matter, how have you satisfied yourself that none of your colleagues have had improper contact with James Ashby?
Well, I'm not going to go into all the conversations that I've had, but I am satisfied that none of my federal parliamentary colleagues had any specific knowledge of this until they saw it in the newspaper.
Why do you say specific? What sort of other knowledge is there?
Well, all sorts of rumours go around the Parliament at all sorts of times.
So you all picked up on rumours?
Look, Barry, the important point here is, did or did not Mr Slipper sexually harass his staff member?
Of course, that's the key point.
And that's the matter before the court. And, the interesting thing, Barry, is that the judge on Friday said that there'd been far too much gratuitous commentary about this case, and I think the case should now be left in the hands of the court to do its job.
Did you pick up on some of these rumours?
I think the case should now be left in the hands of the court to do its job.
But clearly you did. You heard rumours.
Look, it's now in the hands of the court.
You said the first time that you actually knew anything of this, perhaps anything specific about it, was when you read it in the papers. But did you hear anything unofficially from journalists, from media sources?
Look, Barrie, as I said, the place for this to be dealt with now is in the court, and that's where I think it should be. I think Justice Rary's made a very good point, and frankly I think senior ministers in the government who've been out there offering a running commentary on this case, particularly the Attorney-General, should pull their heads in.
Now, the Greens and Labor seem to be going at it, or at least some in the Labor Party are urging their colleagues to be tough on the Greens. If both sides of politics believe that they're extremists, why don't you do a deal and you both agree to put them last?
Well, this is a real problem for the Prime Minister. I mean, she did the deal with the Greens that has given us the carbon tax because she wanted to stay in the lodge. The deal with the Greens has also given us, effectively, no border protection policy and the flood of asylum boats. Now, this is a challenge to the Prime Minister's authority. Effectively, the faceless men are now saying to the Prime Minister, you got it wrong, and it's up to the Prime Minister to determine whether the Greens, not 2 weeks before the election, but now, are her friends in government or her enemies in the electorate.
And just finally on Clive Palmer, why did you tell him not to run in Lilly? Was it that he's too rich, he's too busy, too outspoken? What's the problem with Clive?
Well, I'm not in the business of giving people instructions. I'm delighted that so many people want to join the coalition team.
He says that you gave him instructions. You told him not to run.
Well, believe me, Barrie, I don't give people those sorts of instructions. I'm delighted that a whole range of people want to run for us. I think it's a sign of the fact that the coalition is doing a very good job, that people want to join our team. And look, it's up to the pre-selection panels to pick the best people. So
you're not going to try and run him out of Fairfax now, or run him out of Kennedy, or wherever he turns up?
Look, any member of the party, no matter how rich, no matter how poor, no matter how busy, no matter how much time he or she might have on his hands, is welcome to put a hand up for pre-selection, and the panel will do its job and pick the best candidate.
Thanks for your time this morning.
Thanks so much, Barrie.